Hi. Theoretically, monotimbral synths like Peak can't play more than one type of sound per preset, so playing this, and then immediately this, not to mention both of them together, shouldn't be possible. Unless you apply a little trick I'll show you in this video. In this clip, I'll show you how to create keyboard splits on polyphonic synths so that you can play multiple voices across two splits, each split having its own distinct timbre. Even if, as is the case of Peak, the synth itself wasn't designed to have keyboard splits nor be multitimbral. So how can we make this happen? Have it so that half the keyboard plays one sound polyphonically, like this, and the other half plays a different sound. The way this trick works is by taking each of the tone generators of your synth, of which there are 5 in the case of Peak, 3 oscillators, a ring modulator, and noise generator, and split them to one of 2 splits on the keyboard, or play them on both splits if you like. And by the way, if you think your sound won't be as rich because you don't have all 5 sound sources going on at once, with wavetables, pulse widths, shape modulation, FM, coarse, and unison modes, Peak, for example, can sound very rich with even one oscillator, and I'm sure your synth can do a lot with even one, despite the fact that it may have more. But wait a minute, I just said that monotimbral synths and Peak don't support splits, so how exactly is this going to work? Let me start with a clean preset and show you. You see, Peak and many other synths give each note you play on the keyboard a higher numerical value as you go up, and lets you use that number as a modulation source in the mod matrix. Now, typically this keyboard parameter is used to create subtle changes in a preset as you go up and down the keyboard, say to open up the filter and make a sound brighter as you play higher. But it turns out that if you apply enough mod depth to this parameter, you can make an oscillator completely disappear on one half of the keyboard. So I'll go into the mod matrix, which on a blank preset is completely empty. Choose my source and look for the keyboard, which is right here. Apply it to the oscillator, let's say oscillator 1 to its level. And if I crank it up to 63, which is the highest it'll go, oscillator 1 will play louder as I go up the keyboard, but that's not enough. To make this trick work, I need to go to the level of oscillator 1 in the mixer and turn it all the way down. Once I do that, you actually won't hear it when I play below this middle C, and you'll start hearing it as I go higher above it. And guess what? We just made oscillator 1 play only on this side of the keyboard. If I wanted to assign oscillator 1 to the left side of the keyboard, all I'd need to do is turn the modulation depth the other way around to -64 in this case. Now it's going to play here and not play here at all. Now just to make oscillator 1 distinct, I'll turn it into a sine wave. And I can bring my levels up a bit, so we'll hear this more. And now I could do the opposite to oscillator 2. I'll take its level, bring it down to 0, go into the mod matrix, go to a second slot, use the keyboard here as well, like that, and then apply a mod depth of +63. So slot 1 is going to -64, slot 2 is going to +63, and then we need to apply this to the level of oscillator 2. So now if all goes well, we should have sawtooth here and sine wave here. Now I could go ahead and do the same thing for oscillator 3, for the ring mod, for the noise source, apply it to any split I want, or if I wanted to both. I could, on a per oscillator basis, use any of the wavetables of Peak. I could apply separate modulation to each of the oscillators separately, and they would work and behave completely separately from each other. So that basically is it. But there are some problems with this solution. Let's talk about them and see how we can overcome them. So the first problem is that everything played around the middle C is pretty quiet. You sort of need to play an octave up and an octave down to start hearing sounds properly. So one of the ways to solve that is get a bigger keyboard and play spread out, but there are better ways. What I did here in this particular case, to avoid these sort of two middle octaves, is create a split, which I turn on like this. And now I can move each half of the keyboard to anywhere I want. So I transposed this half up and this half down. So now these two halves stay away from the central octaves and you can hear each sound clearly. Well, you might say, and you'd be right, you're playing really high-pitched notes over here and really low-pitched notes over here. Well, luckily most synths, and certainly Peak, have a way to transpose whatever octave the oscillator is playing using these foot controls here. So I could go either higher but certainly lower using this. And then typically a coarse tuning knob will also let you take it down a whole octave. So now we're playing in a much more normal range here, and we could do the same for oscillator 1. I could bring it up. And if I wanted even more. So this is much more reasonable, and in a bit I'll show you a little trick to even transpose any oscillator either much higher or much lower. If you don't have a keyboard controller that can create splits like this and you're sort of stuck with those relatively quiet middle notes, you can crank up the synth's level, but in some synths you'll do it so much so that you might start to hear a background noise. In this case, you can still make it work in the 2 octaves around middle C. You just might want to apply some external processing to your signal. You could use a gate plugin or effect to help remove noise when you're not playing, and even better, a noise removal plugin like the excellent Bruce Free from Clevgrand, I think that's how you say it, which just makes noise go away by learning its pattern when you aren't playing, can do wonders for a situation where you can't create 2 separate splits. Now remember I said before I'd show you a trick for extreme transposition. That's what I do in this preset here. In Peak, you can take LFO1 or LFO2 and freeze them if you turn their rate all the way down. In this preset, I used a fixed LFO1 to transpose the pitch of oscillator 2 4 octaves down, and you can change that over here to transpose either down to extremes or up to extremes. And you might want to use a tuner to make sure you have the pitch right. Okay, so we've got our split going. We've applied modulation to all the oscillators going to the left side, and we've applied whatever you want to oscillators going to the right side. For example, this is the preset that I played in the introduction to this video. So the left split has 2 oscillators, 1 and 3, and it's doing this with plenty of modulation to the sound, and the right split is just doing a simple thing here. But I hear you say, okay, you've got LFOs going to any oscillator you want. What about the amp envelope? Both these sounds on both splits share the same amp envelope, so they can either start abruptly or start slowly if I bring the attack up gradually, right? But I can't do it separately for each split. They both either come in slowly or have a quick attack. And same thing for the other stages of the amp envelope. If your synth has extra mod envelopes, and in the case of Peak we have 2 mod envelopes, we can actually take each of these 2 and apply them separately to each of the splits. The way that I have this preset set up, mod envelope number 1 controls the left split, and mod envelope number 2 controls the right split. So if I wanted this to remain like it is, and this side to gradually come in, all I do is increase the attack on mod envelope 2, and now this gradually comes in. Let's make it even slower so you'll hear it. And this one is still pretty snappy. So if we go into what the mod matrix looks like on this preset, you'll see in slot 1, I have not only the keyboard controlling the level of oscillator 1, but also mod envelope number 1. Same goes for oscillator 2 for its level. I've got not just the keyboard, but also mod envelope number 2 controlling its level. Now you don't have to waste both envelopes on both splits. You can use just one for the top split and leave the bottom split to use the amp envelope. And then you've got another envelope spare here to do whatever you want with it. The only thing you do need to make sure of is that the main amp envelope encompasses whatever you're doing with the mod envelopes that are controlling either oscillator's level. So let me explain. I've got mod envelope 2 controlling the envelope of the right split. Right? Now if I increased the release here, I still don't hear the release happening on this split. The reason for that is that the amp envelope is blocking it. So I need to increase the release on the main amp envelope so that release on this envelope can be heard. Right? If I block it, you won't hear the release. If I bring it up, you will. By the way, if I wanted this to have a short release, I can still do that. Right? Now this is cutting off the sound. This is letting it go, but you won't hear it because this is stronger. Not to overcomplicate it, just remember if you want to use multiple envelopes, keep the amp envelope attack low and the amp envelope release as high as you need it for the longest release time on either of your mod envelopes. Okay, so we succeeded in creating two completely different splits with oscillators assigned to each split. We're able to give them different envelopes if we want. The last piece of the puzzle should be giving each split its own filter and filter modulation. Now, that problem, unfortunately, I haven't been able to solve, at least not yet, and if you can, please leave a comment below. You can still use the filter, but it's going to apply to both splits. So you need to make sure that you don't filter one out unintentionally. That said, you can get different filter-like sounds going on each of the splits separately if you think of the essence of what a filter does, which is take a harmonically rich sound and remove its harmonics. So if your synth has a wave shaping or wave table functionality, then you can take a simple sound, like even a simple sine wave, and increase its complexity by changing its shape. Right, so increasing shape complexity is sort of like the opposite of applying a filter. So oscillator shapes, wavetables, frequency modulation, oscillator sync, all of these are great ways to increase the harmonic complexity of your sounds without using a filter at all, which is, I think, a great synth tip overall. Leave the filter for last. Try and create harmonic complexity in other ways, and then use the filter as the cherry on top. So that's pretty much it. If you want to download the presets I showed in this video, as well as others I created for Peak, they'll be available on my Patreon. And if you like this style of synth tricks, there are plenty more where this came from in my constantly updated book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, also available to people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if you learned something, ask me anything you want, or offer improvements in the comments section below. Thanks very much for watching.